Hello everybody and welcome to another sit down video on this channel. I know I'd said that I'd be reducing the number of sit down videos on this channel, but I thought I'd just do this one. I know I'm not the best at them, but I thought that this one would be a good one to do because I've never seen it done before. But yeah, first of all, a couple of things I just want to mention. As you'll know from the title, this video is about Blackpool Pleasure Beach. And I basically just like to say thank you for all the support and love that has been given to the previous Blackpool Pleasure Beach vlog. I mean, it's not got that many views, but by my standards it's got quite a few views. I think it's got, last time I checked, about, not sure, 80 something. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's watched that and supported it. And yeah. Following on from that then, I'm just going to talk a bit about shoutouts. Obviously, if you've watched the vlog, you'll know I gave a shoutout in my last vlog. I said I don't normally give shoutouts. I do plan to give more shoutouts, and those of you who are going to be getting shoutouts in the near future, you already know that you're going to be getting them. But, yeah, this is just, well, I kind of already gave a shoutout in this video. I'm not going to give any specific individual shoutouts in this video. I have one or two to give out in the Oakwood vlog, which will be the next video on this channel where you actually hear me speak. I might upload a couple of POVs before then, but I'm not decided then. Well, obviously you'll hear me in the on-ride POVs, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah, that was, technically I just wanted to shout out kind of everyone there. And yeah, we'll get back to individual shout-outs in the next vlog, because, I don't know, I just thought that was the most appropriate place to give them. So yeah. So this video is going to be about what order I think is best. Not to do the ride throughout a day at Blackpool Pleasure Beach as I've sort of done in the past, but what's the best order to do the rides in terms of basically fear. So say you are new to roller coasters and Blackpool Pleasure Beach is like, I don't know, your local park or the park you're planning to go to kind of build up or get rid of your fear of roller coasters. I don't know. You might just be going there, like, whatever. Basically, in this video, I'm going to be talking about what I think, from least scariest to most scariest, the rides are at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I don't think that even made sense, but yeah, basically, what order you should go through the rides if you're trying to overcome sort of your fear of both rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach and your fears of roller coasters. So anyway, let's get into it. So the first ride I want to talk about at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, or roller coaster should I say, because obviously they're all going to be roller coasters, is Blue Flyer in Nickelodeon Land. Now, this is the only roller coaster I would consider at Blackpool Pleasure Beach to be a junior coaster, and for any non-enthusiasts watching this video, a junior coaster is essentially a very small coaster that is suitable for little children, which is essentially what Blue Flyer is. However, unlike most junior coasters, this coaster is a wooden coaster, and yeah, it's very small. It's only around 30 foot tall. By the way, I've not got shots of all these rides that I can show you that I've filmed myself, but I will put some statistics up on the screen which you should be seeing about now for this ride, but I'll also do that for all the rides I'm going to be talking about in this video. There's no specific height I could find on the roller coaster database website, which is the website where all these statistics are coming from, but Blue Flyer, it's around 30 foot tall, which is very small for a roller coaster, with most thrilling roller coasters being at least 60 foot tall, so 30 foot's pretty tiny for this thing. It's about a 1 minute ride, and yeah, it's just essentially there's a lift hill, so, and then it turns around, you've got a few dips, I believe there's 3, and then you essentially turn back around and back into the station. It's not the best of roller coasters, obviously, for us enthusiasts who are a bit more hardcore and into the big thrill rides, but it's certainly something that's suitable for children, I'd say about 4 years or older. So yeah, it's a great first coaster to do, like, even if you've never done a coaster before, and it's the only ride at Blackpool Pleasure Beach which is kind of anywhere close to that. All the other rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach I would consider far too thrilling to do for your first roller coaster, and that's why I've put it here basically. Next up we have Nickelodeon Streak, or Nick Streak as some people call it for short. This is a much bigger wooden roller coaster, It's right next to Blue Flyer, and you may want to do some rides in between this, I'm not sure, because it is a big coaster. I'm not sure of any rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach at all. Well, there is none that kind of bridge the gap between these, but between Nickelodeon Streak and Blue Flyer, there is quite a bit of a jump in sort of intensity, so you may have to look into other parks from that. Rides I've maybe considered good at bridging that gap are possibly the Runaway Mine Train at Alton Towers, a bit of a random choice, but yeah. And I'm not sure of any others, so this is kind of one that you may have to just brave, and if you don't like it, then yeah, you're going to have to, I don't know, find some rides in other places that maybe to help you build up to that. Otherwise, maybe just roller coasters aren't for you. If you're struggling at this point, then this probably indicates that roller coasters aren't really for you, because although there is a big jump between Blue Flyer and this isn't still that thrilling a coaster at all. It's 61 foot tall and reaches speeds of 35 miles per hour, so it is kind of in a family thrill category, but it's very low in a family thrill category. And it's the lowest, obviously, of the rides of what I would consider family thrills at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, with Blue Flyer being a junior coaster. But yeah, essentially you go up the lift hill similar to how you would on Blue Flyer. This does have a turnaround at the start, turnaround at the top of the lift hill like on Blue Flyer. You've got a good few dips then, which are considerably larger than those on Blue Flyer. For any of you who have been on it or seen this ride, you'll know that. And then you turn around back at the end of the layout, or and then you kind of come back, not at the end of the layout, just at the end of those few dips. You basically turn around and come back, and there's a few more dips. It does actually offer a little bit of airtime, so you'll start to get a feel for what airtime is if you ride that. Airtime is basically where you're lifted out the seat, for those of you who are non-enthusiasts. But yeah, that's all there really is to say about this ride. Not one of my favourites at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but certainly a lot better than Blue Flyer. So yeah, anyway, on to the next ride. Coming up next then, we have Steeplechase, possibly quite a controversial choice for some of you. Some of you possibly would be debating where to put this. I myself debated where to put this, because it is kind of a unique roller coaster and does have some element of fear, which I'm going to describe in a moment. So Steeplechase, it's a lot newer than the rides we've just described, which opened in the 1930s. This is a 1977 Arrow coaster. And what's unique about this is you're riding on horses on sort of a single rail track, so you're very free on this coaster. You've not got like a lap bar or anything. You're literally riding horses kind of in a carousel kind of style. And yeah, now you've seen where the element of fear is on this coaster. You are quite free. You're obviously strapped in so that you're safe, otherwise this wouldn't be allowed to operate if it was unsafe. But yeah, this has 2 lift hills, this ride. It's very small, not sure the exact statistics. I can't remember every statistic, but they will be up on the screen, or at least the ones I have will be up on the screen. Some, like I said, some RCDB, they don't have a record of the exact height and speed of these coasters, it depends, but Steeplechase isn't that fast to ride, but you do feel it because of how you sat. Obviously you sat on a horse, so you do feel it a lot more. It's not thrilling, but it is thrilling. It's thrilling in that there's an element of fear. Like, even I still go on this coaster and think, oh my word, because of the way you sat, you feel like you're heading towards turns quite quickly. But you're not really. Also, that's another thing, the transitions on this ride are quite sudden, just due to the nature of how it's designed. They're quite sudden, so there are a couple of jolts on this ride. It's not rough. Apart from that, it's actually one of the smoothest rides at the Pleasure Beach. Like, I'm not even joking, really smooth, no rattle or anything, but the corners are a bit jolty. It can be painful. It depends who you are. I don't personally find it painful at all, but I know other people do, and that's all there really is to say about this ride. It's not that fast, it's not that tall, the drops aren't very big, it doesn't really have any airtime, but simply the fact you're on horses kind of adds an element of fear to it. So yeah, many people do feel a little scared about going on this ride. I didn't personally have this problem, but I know quite a few people get kind of a bit scared over this ride and they've never been on it before. But personally, and by the way, this isn't necessarily the order that I did these rides in, this is just the order I think is best to do them in, having ridden all the coasters that are currently operating at Blackpool Pleasure Beach as of creating this. But yeah, this is what I would personally recommend you try and do next, Steeplechase. And kind of the element of fear that will kind of provide you, or get you ready, sorry, for some of the bigger rides later on. So yeah. Next up then we have Avalanche, a Mack bobsleigh coaster. I believe this one opened in 1988, so the newest ride we've discussed so far, but we do have some newer rides to discuss yet. And what I mean by bobsleigh coaster is this is also quite unique in that, maybe not as unique as Steeplechase, but also quite unique because you're actually sat in toboggan style cars, and the seating is kind of, I guess in line is the best way to describe it, in that each car seats two people like most roller coaster kind of rows, but in this case you're actually sat in front or behind in each other, so basically someone will be sat in front and someone will be sat behind, essentially on one seat, because of how it's designed to be like kind of sledges. You're also sat very low to the ground. This is actually a cool one to ride on the front row for kind of the views and stuff you get. You kind of do get to see things from quite a unique perspective because of how low you are, but the back's the fastest on this ride. Also you'll be able to see from the statistics that this is quite a fast coaster compared to the ones we've seen so far. Reaches around 50 miles per hour, so yeah, definitely we're getting well into the family thrill category now. So essentially what this is, it starts off a normal roller coaster track, you go up a lift hill, then at the top you go onto sort of a tubular track. I do have some footage of this ride which I'll show on the screen now so you can see what I mean. So you go into like, almost like a water slide style track as I like to call it. And here the car is essentially allowed to move freely down the track, so there is that element of fear again, but you do feel you are quite restrained on Avalanche because the lap bars are quite tight. But yeah, essentially there's no airtime because there's no hills on this ride. You essentially just go around a series of turns that are gradually sloping down, so the coaster basically gathers more speed as you're going down, so it's quite a gradual build up, which is kind of quite nice for those of you who aren't that into roller coasters. It doesn't suddenly launch to a really high speed like some other roller coasters would, so you do get that gradual build up to this quite high top speed. It's actually one of the faster rides at the Pleasure Beach, and there's only 2 or 3 rides that kind of beat it in that area, even though we have like 6 or 7 more rides to discuss. So yeah, but there's no real other elements of thrill. It is a thrilling ride, don't get me wrong, but it's not as thrilling as some of the other rides we're going to be talking about later. I personally think this is an okay ride. It's definitely well into my top 10, but sometimes it can be a bit uncomfortable, and yeah, I'm not a big fan of the restraints on this ride, and it's just not as interesting as some of the other rides. I don't really personally find it scary. If you're riding it for your first time, you might feel a bit scared to do it, but you should definitely do it because it's not that bad. It's very hard, you'll notice from the shots I showed you previously, to get shots of this ride because of how the track's designed, because if you're on the outside of a corner you can't really see the ride because of how it's designed. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about Avalanche. Not sure of the height of this ride, but it is quite tall. Obviously, so it can gather that speed as it goes down as well. It does kind of need to be quite tall. But yeah, anyway, on to the next ride. Next up we have one of my personal favourite rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and the oldest coaster at the park, and that is Big Dipper. This is a really good ride. It opened in 1923, which means there's not very long to go until the 100th anniversary of this ride. So it's incredible that it's still operating to how it is today. It's very smooth for a ride of its age. you can tell it gets a lot of maintenance, a lot of love, which is what it deserves, because it is a good coaster, and it's definitely well into that family thrill kind of area. So, but if you have been doing the coasters so far, especially if you've done Nick Streak, you are more than ready for this ride. So this is essentially a faster version of Nick Streak, essentially, is what I'll refer to it to. The first part of the layout is very similar to Nick Streak, however it does go off into a bit of a different part of the, kind of a different style layout later on. So yeah, the forces are very similar to Nick Streak, so pretty much, if you've done Nick Streak, you can probably go to this ride quite comfortably. There's not much of a jump between the rides. Like these last few rides, Nick Streak, Steeplechase, Avalanche and Big Dipper, there's quite small jumps between them, which means you probably could do them in any order, but that's just personally the order that I think, if I was trying to build someone up on these rides, I'd kind of do them with that person in, if that makes sense. So this is actually 60 foot tall, so actually 1 foot shorter than Nick Streak, which is interesting. However, it is quite a bit faster than Nick Streak. The drops are a bit bigger and a bit steeper as well, meaning that it reaches around about, I think, about the 45 miles per hour mark, which you don't really feel on the ride. Like, although this is like 10 miles an hour faster than Nick Streak, you don't feel that different. It feels like more like 5 miles an hour faster than Nick Streak. But yeah, you got a really long, well, you technically got 2 lift hills, because it starts with like a tunnel. I've not got any footage of this ride, but you go into a tunnel, you go like a small lift hill, then there's a couple of turns into the main lift hill, which takes you to that 60 foot mark. This does actually, the coaster does actually look a lot taller than 60 foot, because it has this kind of like big statue thing. I don't know what it is. Like, it's almost, I think it's like the top of the station or something. I don't really know what it is, but it's like a beacon almost. Well, not a beacon, but a big kind of structure, which kind of has supports that kind of go inward as it goes up, which means that kind of the bottom of this structure is quite large, but then the top bit, which is where the turnaround at the top of the lift hill is before the first drop of the ride, that's actually quite small, meaning that it gives the illusion that it's more like 80 foot, but don't let you put that off. These statistics are from RCDB, which is what all of us theme park enthusiasts go off and trust. So yeah, these are accurate because they're on RCDB. Other sources may not be accurate, but yeah, so you got a few drops. You get a little bit of airtime depending on where you sat on this ride, at the top of some of those hills. Only a bit, not too much, but kind of the right amount for anyone who's built up on these rides up to this point. So a bit more than Nick Streak. So yeah, don't let that put you off either. And then you go into like these turns. This ride was actually extended in, I believe, 1936 when Pleasure Beach bought the land to South Park. South Park being where Steeplechase is, and also some of the rides we're going to be talking about later on, including the big one. That's part of South Park, so the ride was kind of extended to kind of go around kind of the big one area. So you go into a series of turns that I believe were kind of made bigger, whereas before those were quite sharp. So yeah, that's how they extended it. Then you just got a few more dips basically. So yeah, essentially kind of a Nick Streak style layout with a few more turns, twists and turns. Nick Streak's kind of just pure kind of drops and hills basically, with a couple of turnarounds. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about Big Dipper. There's quite a bit to say about that ride anyway. On to the next section. Coming up next, we have a ride that I'm not a big fan of, and that is Grand National. Which is very close to the entrance of the park actually. It's the first wooden coaster you'll come to, but definitely not the first wooden coaster you should ride, as I'll discuss in a minute. This is a ride that I've only done once, and I personally can't stand it at all. I've done it once, and it's going to take a lot of persuasion for someone to get me to do this again. And you might be thinking, so why have you only placed this here on this list? And that's because it's not that thrilling, but it's very, very rough. And if you don't like rough coasters, I'm not a massive fan of rough coasters, it really isn't the ride for you. And yeah, I believe sometimes it gives smooth rides, sometimes it gives rough rides, but when I went on it, it definitely was giving a rough ride, because I just remember being flung all over the place, which actually adds to the intensity of this ride and why I've actually put it above Big Dipper. So this, again, is very similar to Big Dipper. It's the tallest wooden coaster in the park, however only by 1 foot, as this is 62 foot high, meaning it's 1 foot higher than Nickelodeon Streak. Yeah, it's strange how rough it is, because it's actually, I believe, wait, let me think, it's the newest wooden coaster in the park that's still operating, with it opening in 1935, obviously Big Dipper 1923, and then Nick Streak 1933, Blue Fly 1934, so yeah, apart from taking into consideration that Big Dipper was extended, this is the newest wooden coaster in the park, and the roughest. So you've got a lift hill, you've got a turn around, and this is essentially what I'd like to call an extension of Nick Streak. It's essentially got a few kind of drops and hills and a turnaround, a few drops and hills and a turnaround, and it repeats that about 4 times. But yeah, these drops are a bit steeper. I wouldn't say they're as big as Big Dipper, but again, they're a bit steeper. Big Dippers are around about 46 degrees, whereas Grand Nationals are something around 50 degrees. Also, I'd say that the dips are kind of more sudden transitions as well, so you do kind of get flung down them a bit more. But it does have really good airtime, this ride, as well. Yeah, quite a bit of airtime compared to the Big Dipper, which was great when we were on it, but it was how rough it was that was a problem. Every time we kind of hit the bottom of a drop and went back up, you were just thrown all over the place basically, and it was quite painful. So I would say give this ride a go for the credits. Get the credit. Hopefully you get a smooth ride. Try not to sit on a wheel, as I believe there. We sat quite near the back, and I believe the back's the worst place. Yeah, I'm not the best person to ask for advice on Grand Nationals. I've done it once, but I have done it. But yeah, that's all there really is to say about it, which kind of concludes the family thrill category. We're now getting into the big thrill kind of category, the more extreme rides at the park, and some of my personal favourite rides at the park. So yeah, so our first ride of the big thrills category, as I'm calling it. These categories are made by me, by the way. They're not the categories used at the Pleasure Beach, but they're what I like to use to kind of categorise these rides. And yeah, this ride is the first ride of the list which actually goes upside down. Features a vertical loop within its layout. So yeah, none of the rides so far go upside down, will have any inversions, as we'd say in the theme park community. Yeah, I'm trying to cater this for obviously the theme park community as well as any of the general public who may be watching this. So yeah, Revolution is an Arrow shuttle coaster, I believe that's the technical name for it. And yeah, it consists of 2 raised sections of the track. You're launched off the first section of the track. I'm not going to go into this ride in too much detail because I waffled on for it ages in another video. This isn't really the kind of video for kind of geeky talk about rides. I'm just putting some statistics in there so that to kind of reassure those of you who are riding regarding the forces experienced on this on each ride, essentially, as well as the height and stuff. Basically, just to kind of prove what I'm saying is essentially that's the only reason why I'm stating statistics and displaying them on the screen. But yeah, so you launched off the first section of track, down a drop into a loop, up another hill, onto the second raised section of track, and then that process is basically repeated in reverse. So you essentially launch backwards by another launch mechanism. They're basically 2 metal plates that launch you. That's the simplest way to put it. And basically you go through the loop backwards and back up onto the first race section of track, which is where the station is, and that's the rides. So, not completely aware of the top speed of this coaster, but it is quite high. It's definitely within the 40 miles an hour. I know that, and you do reach it quite quickly because of the launch. It's not the fastest launch in the world at all, but yeah, you are accelerated to that quite quickly. And also when you kind of drop off that first section of track into the drop, which is 47 foot, you do experience a large amount of airtime. Actually, one of the best moments of airtime in the park. And then that loop is quite an intense inversion, not so intense forwards, but when that process is repeated in the reverse, everything applies what I've just said. You get the exact same amount of airtime and stuff. It's an intense inversion backwards, I'm not going to lie. It's honestly one of the best inversions that I've experienced, and it still gets me every time I ride it. I still feel like, wow, that was intense. But don't let you put it off. It's only like 10 seconds each way. It's 10 seconds, but it's 10 seconds, and it's definitely worth riding. Trust me, it's such a good introduction into looping roller coasters. So it's the perfect first upside down coaster to do. I know the backwards bit's quite intimidating. I know a lot of people actually find this ride quite intimidating and will put off riding it until riding stuff like the big one. But this is personally, I think, better to do before the big one, as I know I'm making it out to be really, really intense. It's an intense ride, but not as intense as the big one. It's just that considering how simple it is the best way to kind of put this. It is very intense considering how simple it is, but definitely not the most intense ride at the park by quite a long way. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Revolution. This is one you just need to do. Like, I put off doing Revolution when I probably was ready, when I was ready to do it, and I did another coaster first in Paris. I did the Indiana Jones before Revolution, which is a better looping coaster to do first because you don't have to worry about the backwards bit, so it's literally just one loop and that's it. So that was alright for me, but not everyone's going to be able to get out to Disneyland Paris to do Indiana Jones, so trust me what I'm saying. Revolution really isn't that bad. It's intense considering how simple it is, but it's so good at preparing you for some of the bigger coasters. It is the coaster that I did do Grand National then Revolution, and Revolution, from doing the bigger coasters, I know that in terms of forces it's much closer. The forces are much more like those you'll experience on some of the coasters I'm about to talk about in a minute. So yeah, definitely just pluck up the courage and do Revolution once you've done all the rides up to this point, because trust me, it's not that big a jump from Grand National again. It's just, you know, it's not that big a jump. Grand National's an intense ride. It's just that this has the airtime like Grand National does, but it's also got an inversion as well, and the launch. Anyway, so yeah. Next up we have my personal favourite ride at the Pleasure Beach, and that is Icon. Now, once you've done Revolution, you're perfectly prepared for Icon. Some of you may debate that it's better to do Icon before Revolution because of Revolution's backward section, but I do feel like Icon is a more intense ride overall. The inversions on Icon are probably less intense, but there are some quite intense elements on this ride, and I feel like after you've done something like Revolution where you're kind of experiencing something intense for a very short period of time, you'll be ready to experience Icon, which is kind of intense, quite intense throughout the ride. So yeah, it's not really intense like Revolution, like that intense throughout the entire ride, but there are some kind of the intensity is kind of spread out over a longer period of time, so there are still quite a few elements where it's kind of less intense, but it's prolonged in that way, which you don't get on the smaller coasters that I mentioned so far. So Icon then kind of combines everything I've talked about so far. It's a Mack multi-launch coaster, and yeah, it starts off with a launch. You'll know how much I love Icon if you watch my other videos. I definitely recommend you go and watch other videos on Icon, such as my review and stuff on my channel, to hear a bit more about this coaster. You know what, I'll put a link to my Icon review in the description so you can see a bit more of this coaster and hear me kind of talk about the forces in a bit more detail if you're kind of plucking up the courage to do it. I definitely recommend you go and check that out, because I'm going to talk about it quite briefly here. So you start off with a launch, which is obviously similar to Revolution's launch. This one's a bit more forceful. It's not really forceful or anything. It's not like Rita at Alton Towers. If any of you have done that, that's a forceful launch, but that's a different type of launch to Icon. Again, go and watch my review where I explain a bit more why Icon's launch is less intense than Rita's launch, and kind of explain the differences between the types of launches and kind of the reasons behind this. So Icon is plenty of airtime. Straight after the launch, you go into what's often referred to as, some people call it a top hat, others call it an airtime hill. It's kind of in between. A top hat's kind of often usually regarded as an airtime hill that's kind of vertical. I don't believe Icon's airtime hill's completely vertical. It's close to vertical, but yeah, you do feel force on it, but you won't be able to tell that it's vertical when you're going up it. So don't worry about how steep it is, because you don't feel a lot of force considering, but you do get a good amount of airtime, and Icon does have quite a bit of airtime throughout the ride. 2 inversions on this ride, or 1 inversion, as I know some of you will be questioning me saying that, because as you will have seen from the statistics, it states there's 1 inversion. You've got RCDB states it as being an inline twist, but I've heard it called a 0G roll, which is what I believe I refer to it as in my review. I've heard other enthusiasts call it a 0G roll as well, so I'm a bit confused to what it is now, to be honest. But then you got a second launch, which is a bit faster. This is the second fastest ride at the park, by the way. It has a top speed of 52.8 miles an hour, so technically 53 miles per hour, which is achieved on that second launch. You then go into what I consider to be an inversion, but according to RCDB it's not, and apparently it's a Junior Immelman, which is basically kind of part of a loop where it like twists out. You'll see on your screen now in your footage. Now, I mean, give your thoughts in the comments below. I think that this ride it looks as if it goes upside down in this, but according to RCDB it does not have a steep enough angle to be considered as going upside down, which Junior Immelman is an inversion that doesn't go upside down, but it looks like, well, I've never ridden a full Immelman, so I wouldn't know, but to me that goes upside down, so not quite sure about that one. I personally consider it as an inversion, but whether it officially is an inversion is a different story. But yeah, you do get the same forces as you would on an inversion, so just treat it as an inversion. That's the best moment of the ride for me. You are taking out the seat quite a bit on that. It's also worth noting Icon has lap bars, unlike Revolution, which has over-the-shoulder restraints. Don't let you put that off the inversions. They do feel slightly different with a lap bar. In a good way, you get what's known as hang time, where they feel quite kind of hangy, which is, trust me, that's nothing to be worried about. In fact, because they have hang time, that's kind of why they're less intense. You're not going through them as quickly, so you actually feel less force that's likely to kind of cause you be too much for you to bear. You feel less force on those inversions than you do on Revolution's loops, so that's actually a good thing for you, that it does have hang time, and that's another thing that may reassure you. But yeah, plenty of airtime. You do have the helixes, which are the intense parts of the ride, as you get similar forces on them to you will on Revolution's loop, but they're nothing to worry about either. Not too intense. This is still, I know we're in big thrill coasters, but it's still a fun coaster that the family will be able to enjoy if you built yourself up to this. It's a fun coaster more than anything else. I've not heard many people, if any, come off Icon and not like and find it too much. It's just a perfect coaster for the park, and yeah, I've talked about it quite a bit for this review now, but if you do want to hear me rave about this ride a lot more and describe the forces in a bit more detail, as well as the elements on the ride, definitely go and check out my review. Second to last then, we have arguably the most famous coaster at the Pleasure Beach, and that is, of course, the Big One, or Big One. Now, I know what you're all thinking, this is a bit of a jump from something like Icon, and I'm not going to lie, in some ways it is a bit of a big jump from Icon. And the main fear element with this coaster, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that famous first drop that twists as it's going down. I say famous, and that is because at one time the Big One was the tallest and I believe the fastest coaster in the world. And possibly the steepest as well. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was the tallest and fastest and steepest. But by today's standards, it's actually not considered that steep at all, or actually that tall at all, or that fast at all, because there are plenty of coasters throughout the world now that are the Big One's basically like a baby compared to them, because there's coasters like twice the height of it, in America anyway. I know that for sure. Now if you look at the rest of the Big One's layout, you'll notice that there's not that much to it, and that's the thing, it's literally that first drop. If you can get over your fear of the first drop, you're going to enjoy the rest of the ride, for the simple reason that the rest of the ride is forceless. Like, there's no force whatsoever. It can be a little bit rough sometimes, but not on the scale of Grand National. The roughness of this ride is over exaggerated a lot. And also it gets quite a bit of hate, which I don't think it really deserves. It's grown on me over time and it's actually running really well at the moment and not very rough. So now is a really good time to do the Big One if you've never done it before. And I do know people who are kind of getting ready to do the big... Sorry guys, there's a car outside. People who are getting ready to do the Big One. It's not... It took me a bit to get over my fear of this ride because, I don't know, that first drop just really put me off despite all the inversions I've done. Because to me, drops I find more intense than inversions for me. They are more of a thing that could put me off a coaster than inversions. That's apart from the Smiler, which just I'm put off by simply how many inversions there are on that ride, and I've still never ridden that coaster yet, but I plan to do it at some point. I'm not sure when I'll do it, but I will do it. But yeah, it really is a shame how the UK doesn't have what's known as a mega coaster. I know I'm not referring to Icon. I know some people call those coasters mega coasters. They're technically not. Icon is not technically a mega coaster because it is under 100 foot, and a mega coaster is anything between 100 and 200 foot, well 199 because 200 foot would be in the hypercoaster category, which the Big One is, so it's an Arrow hypercoaster, Arrow being the people who also manufactured Revolution, but the rides are nothing like each other, so don't even think about that because Revolution feels nothing like the Big One whatsoever, but they're both really good rides. So yeah, it's a shame we don't have a mega coaster. We kind of that it would be kind of similar to the Big One. That's what these rides are like. Similar to kind of the Big One, basically a load of hills and turns, but they're obviously a bit smaller, more like 150 foot, because that would be a really good stepping stone to doing the Big One, because I feel like the jump between Icon and the Big One is quite big, only because of that first drop. Like, that's it. It's not as bad as it looks, that first drop, so if you are sure that you can conquer that first drop, you're going to be able to do it because it's not as bad as it looks. So if you look at that and think, I might actually be able to manage that, just do the ride, because trust me, it's not as bad as it looks. It does have force at the bottom of it, but it's not as bad as it looks. trust me, the worst part of the big one is the climb up to that first drop, because the ride's so tall, the lift hill lasts forever, and when you're on it for the first time, trust me, it feels like forever, because I remember only back in July 2018, that was the first time I did this ride. I'd been putting it off for a long time, and it's actually the first ride I did at the Pleasure Beach, because I was going to do it in like 2015, but I just got too scared and didn't do it. And then kind of in 2016, I remember going and we just didn't get round to it because the park was like so busy with school trips and stuff. I was on a school trip then as well. And there was other times like in 2017 where it was like windy and stuff, and we just didn't end up doing it until 2018, even though I was kind of felt ready to do it by kind of 2017. But anyway, I did it last July 2018. Go and watch the vlog to see my first reaction to the big one. You'll know I'm quite underwhelmed, but I do enjoy the coaster now because it's really improved this year. So yeah, I'll put a link to that vlog in the description as well. So you got that first drop, which you'll feel 3.5 Gs at the bottom, which is actually not that much force. And I've done it a few times, it really isn't that much force you feel at the first drop. It's noticeable force, and it's the most forceful drop you'll feel at the Pleasure Beach, but it's not actually that much considering that Icon has over 4 Gs of force. So yeah, you don't really feel that extra G-force on Icon. It doesn't feel like as much force as it is. It does feel, the most force you get on the Icon probably feels less than the bottom of the drop on the big one. Obviously Icon's force is sustained though, so you kind of do, like, the force on the big one lasts for only a brief second essentially, whereas Icon has more sustained forces. Because as I said, the rest of the big one's ride is forceless. The drop, for any of you who are wondering, is 65 degrees, so steepest, actually Icon's kind of drop out of the Immelman possibly, and the Top Hat / Airtime Hill is probably steeper than that, but that's only 82 foot, Icon being 88 foot tall. But yeah, another thing with the big one is the Pleasure Beach advertised it as being 235 foot tall. It's actually not, as you would have seen in the statistics from RCDB. It's 235 foot above sea level, but from the actual park, it's only 213 foot because of the extra distance kind of upwards, obviously with the beach and stuff between the sea and the land on which the park's situated on, and the coaster itself. And the drop, for those who are wondering, is 205 foot, so a lot bigger than anything else at the Pleasure Beach. But when taking the force into consideration and the fact it's only for a brief second, if you've done Icon and you kind of having that urge that kind of, actually it might not be that bad, the big one, it's only that first drop, the rest of it's fine, do it, because trust me, the big one's not as bad as it looks. And after that first drop, I'd compare the forces on it and kind of feelings you get to Big Dipper, quite similar to that. The drops aren't very steep after that, they are quite big, some of them, but nowhere near 205 foot. So yeah, it's a really long ride, the big one as well, around 3 minutes long. 74 miles per hour, so obviously by far fastest ride at the park, thanks to that first drop. But you don't really feel that 74 miles per hour apart from at the bottom of the first drop, where you do feel quite a bit of wind in your face. But after that, it's quite fast throughout the rest of it, until it hits the mid-course brake run towards the end of the ride, which is, for those of you like seen POVs and stuff from the general public, that's like those brakes you go into before those corners at the end, which you barely feel anything on. So kind of the ride's over after those brakes, to be honest. But yeah, that's all I've really had to say about the big one. We've only got one more ride to go now, so yeah. Last but not least, we have the ride that enthusiasts hate, but the general public seem to love, and that is Infusion. Now Infusion, for those of you who don't know, those of you enthusiasts will most likely know, it's a Vekoma SLC with a standard layout. If you don't know what an SLC is, that stands for Suspended Looping Coaster. essentially a coaster with inversions being the main focus, manufactured by a company called Vekoma. When I say standard layout, I basically mean there's clones of this ride all over the world. The original ride is known as El Condor, and that's located in Wallaby, Holland, in the Netherlands. And basically there's been clones and clones and clones of this ride made over the world. So essentially what I'm saying is that to all of you in the general public who absolutely love this ride and think it's amazing, it's really not. It's just a clone of a million other rides around the world. So yeah, this ride gets stupid queues and I personally find it unbearable. I've done it once and it's unbearable. I am considering giving it another chance, riding it further towards the front of the train because I rode it middle to back. But yeah, this ride is an absolute headbanger. Your head is banged against. This ride has over-the-shoulder restraints similar to Revolution. Obviously they're a bit different because of it being a different manufacturer. But yeah, your head is continuously banged against those restraints throughout the ride. It starts off with a lift hill and then you go into a drop. This is 109 foot tall, this ride. You reach around about 50 miles per hour, so I believe this is the third fastest ride at the Pleasure Beach. Just slightly faster than Avalanche. You do feel the speed of this ride. Yeah, and that first drop you do feel a bit as well. I've only done this once, by the way. I am considering giving it another go though. I know there's a lot of enthusiasts who just or some anyway, who just won't even ride this ride because they won't even do it for the credit because it's a standard SLC. But yeah, and then other enthusiasts who'll do it for the credit and never ride it again. I've heard some people say that towards the front of the train, especially on the front row, the ride is quite smooth. And that on some days it can give quite smooth rides, but yeah, when I rode it, it wasn't running smooth at all, which has put me off it. Yeah, most enthusiasts just think this thing is awful. This ride's got 5 inversions, so considerably more than any ride at the Pleasure Beach, and it is it's intense throughout. And what makes it intense is the roughness. The reason I'm ranking it so high is basically for the intensity and the inversions, because it is intense and it has a lot of inversions, which will make some of you, if you just jump to this ride, it may make you feel quite sick if you're not kind of built up with stuff like the big one. It's not that much higher in terms of the forces than the big one, but it does pull over 4 Gs, so similar to Icon, and it maintains its force quite a bit throughout the ride. It is less intense though than rides such as Nemesis at Alton Towers, but Nemesis is a lot smoother, so yeah, I'll happily ride Nemesis. So yeah, you've got a rollover, which is basically 2 loops joined by a corkscrew in the middle, and you've got 2 half loops joined by a corkscrew in the middle. You've got hammerhead turn, which is half a loop joined by a corkscrew. I'm just translating for those of you who are general public. And 2, I believe they're inline twists, which are essentially like the track twists all the way around twice in a row. And yeah, it's on those inline twists especially that your head is bashed against those restraints. But yeah, definitely do it for the credit, because you never know, you might get a smooth ride on it. I don't personally find it as bad as Grand National for roughness, so it wouldn't take as much persuasion for anyone to get me on this ride again, because I'd rather have my head banged against a restraint than kind of been thrown all over the place like I'm in a washing machine. Like, the difference is on Grand National your whole body's thrown around, whereas on this it's just your head that suffers. Apart from that, the rest of your body's fine. So yeah, I remember coming off this ride and it took me a couple of seconds to get my balance because I think how rough it was. I must have been dizzy for a couple of seconds, but I was okay after that. I don't remember having a headache, but this ride could easily give you a headache because of how much it bashes your head around. So yeah, just be wary of that. But yeah, anyway, that's all I really have to say about that ride, and that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope that this has kind of helped some of you feel a bit better about doing some of these rides. I know some of you probably watched bits of this video and not others. But yeah, to put it short, Blue Flyer is the ride I consider to be the least intense of the Pleasure Beach, and Infusion the most. So just to recap, the order I recommend you do it in the coasters in at Pleasure Beach is Blue Flyer, then Nickelodeon Streak, then Steeplechase, then Avalanche, then Big Dipper, then Grand National, then Revolution, then Icon, then the big one, then Infusion. Not necessarily that, to make it clear, not necessarily that's the right order to do it in for when you're at Pleasure Beach for the day. Just on a regular day to avoid the crowds. I have done another video on that. This is just what I consider to be the best order for anyone who's kind of getting over their fear of roller coasters, and if they're doing that at the Pleasure Beach on the day out or whatever. But yeah, I don't think that, I'll be surprised if anyone managed this to get from doing Blue Flyer to something like Infusion in one day. Like, that'd just be insane. Really, for your sake, you should kind of build up slowly. That's the easiest way I find to do it. I rode Infusion before the big one in 2016 simply because I was like, I've been on Valhalla before and I was like, I wanted to dry off, and someone somehow managed to persuade me to go on Infusion. I literally don't know what I was thinking, because that was really a really intense ride for me to do at the time. But yeah, I did like it, apart from the fact it was so rough, which just has put me off completely. But some people, I feel like I might be over exaggerating its roughness a bit, but lots of enthusiasts would kind of exaggerate it as much as me, which is kind of, since I rode it, I feel like I've heard a lot of people say it's rough, which has just kind of made me believe that even more, and kind of put me off from doing it again even more. But I've definitely give this ride another chance at some point, and ride it in a different place, because you know, I was probably sat in a bad seat. There are a lot of bad seats in Infusion, but there are apparently also some good seats. So yeah, someone will get me to go on it at some point, I'm sure, whenever I go to Blackpool with someone. So yeah, thank you for watching. As I said, those of you who will be getting shout-outs, you'll get them in the next video. Some of you already know that you're going to be getting them, as you said before. Well, 1 or 2 people do. But yeah, I'll see you next time.